For over 3 decades, we bought into the flawless Full House brotherhood between Uncle Jesse and Danny Tanner. But today, the wholesome narrative takes a brutal turn. At 62, John Stamos finally reveals the truth about Bob Saget. He confessed that he didn't just dislike his co-star. He found Saget's comedy so unbearably cheesy that he turned a family-friendly set into a hostile battleground of screaming matches. Why did a man he once wanted to completely erase from his life end up leaving him utterly destroyed? To understand the gravity of this confession, you have to look at the man John Stamos was before he became America's favorite uncle. Born on August 19th, 1963 in Cypress, California, John Philip Stamos was the son of a restaurateur and a model. He was a quintessential California boy, obsessed with Elvis, gifted with a full head of hair, and possessing a charm that worked like a skeleton key in Hollywood. His breakthrough came in 1982 as Blackie Parrish on General Hospital, a role that earned him a Daytime Emmy nomination and turned him into a teenage deity. By the time Full House entered development in 1987, Stamos wasn't just an actor. He was a brand. He was the cool guy, the musician, the heartthrob. He expected the show to be a sophisticated vehicle for his transition into adult stardom. He wanted a comedy that felt like Cheers. What he got was a set filled with toddlers, puppets, and a tall, lanky stand-up comedian who didn't seem to take anything seriously. The initial crack in the Full House facade started the moment Bob Saget walked through the door. While the world saw 2 brothers-in-law helping a grieving father raise 3 girls, the reality behind the cameras was a psychological collision. John Stamos was a disciplined product of the soap opera world. He valued timing, lighting, and serious acting. Bob Saget was an edgy, filterless comedian who thrived on blue humor and chaos. Stamos looked at Saget and saw a man who was ruining the art of the sitcom with his goofy antics. Saget looked at Stamos and saw a pretty boy who was taking a show about a giant talking dog and 3 kids way too seriously. The friction wasn't just a creative difference. It was a total rejection of each other's existence. But the truth Stamos is revealing at 62 isn't about professional disagreements. It's about a sudden, violent silence that occurred on January 9th in 2022. Bob Saget was found dead in a hotel room at the Ritz-Carlton in Orlando, Florida. No drugs, no foul play, just a freak accident, a head injury he sustained alone and thought he could sleep off. For John Stamos, that day was a total emotional blackout. He has since admitted that he didn't just feel sad. He felt physically dismantled. "I am broken. I am gutted," he tweeted. It was a reaction so visceral it confused fans who only knew them as co-stars. Why would the cool uncle be this destroyed by the dorky dad? The answer lies in the 35 years of war they had to survive first. The first layer of this storm was the ego war of the late 80s. In his 2023 memoir, If You Would Have Told Me, Stamos finally admitted to something he had buried for decades. He tried to get Bob Saget fired. During the filming of the very first episode, Stamos felt that Saget's stand-up guy energy was making the show feel too cheesy, too amateur. He went to the producers and demanded a change. He wanted a real actor. He wanted to be the undeniable center of the show. The backstage atmosphere was a powder keg of arrogance and insecurity. Stamos was the star, but Saget was getting the laughs. They were locked in a ruthless battle for the spotlight, each one convinced the other was the reason the show might fail. They were 2 men forced to hug for millions of viewers while mentally calculating how to erase each other from the script. The second was the explosion of clashing identities. Behind the scenes of the Tanner household, the screaming matches were legendary. Stamos would snap at Saget for missing marks. Saget would mock Stamos for his vanity. It was a toxic loop. Saget's humor was notoriously dirty, a sharp contrast to the squeaky clean Danny Tanner image, and he used it like a weapon to disarm Stamos' cool exterior. Stamos in turn retreated into a shell of star behavior, making it clear he felt Saget was beneath him. They weren't brothers. They were competitors trapped in a cage of high ratings. They stayed together because the show was a juggernaut, but the resentment was a living thing. Stamos recently confessed that if you had told him in 1987 that he would one day call Bob Saget his person, he would have laughed in your face. Hatred was their only common language. As the years turned into decades, the pretty boy and the dirty comic were both humbled by the same thing, real life. They both lost parents. They both faced the terrifying uncertainty of life after a mega-hit show. Stamos struggled with sobriety and a high-profile divorce from Rebecca Romine. Saget was the one who showed up. The man Stamos once tried to fire became the man who sat by his bed during his darkest hours. Saget's humor, once perceived as cheesy, but then became the only thing that could pierce through Stamos' depression. They realized that the spotlight they had fought over was an illusion, but the man standing next to them in the dark was real. The revelation John Stamos is making now, with the perspective of a 62-year-old survivor, is that the thinnest line in the world is the one between hating someone and needing them. He admits that he spent years of his life blinded by his own ego, unable to see that the very person he found too much was the only person who would truly be enough when his world fell apart. The truth about Bob Saget isn't just that he was a great guy. It's that John Stamos was a difficult one, and Bob loved him anyway. When the news from Orlando hit in 2022, Stamos wasn't just losing a friend, he was losing his witness. Bob was the only person who knew exactly how hard it was to be Jesse Katsopoulos. He was the only one who remembered the screaming matches and the ego wars, and he was the one who had forgiven all of it. Now as John Stamos navigates his 60s, he is haunted by a final unanswerable question. Why does it take a lifetime of war to realize you've already found your brother? He survived the toxic set of Full House, but he is struggling to survive the silence of an empty hotel room. A sitcom hug is scripted, but a 35-year forgiveness is the only thing that actually matters. The immediate consequences of their toxic backstage war during the early years of Full House were more than just bruised egos. It was a psychological tax that nearly bankrupted the show's soul. John Stamos has recently confessed that the atmosphere on set was often suffocating. A cold war of silence punctuated by explosive outbursts. The hatred was so that it bled into their performances. Stamos admitted that in certain scenes where Jesse and Danny were supposed to be bonding, he was actually gritting his teeth, resenting every second he had to share the frame with a man he considered his professional inferior. This friction didn't just make for a tense set. It nearly destroyed the possibility of the very brotherhood that would one day save his life. He was paying a pride tax, losing years of potential friendship to the hollow pursuit of being the number one on a call sheet. The turning point didn't come from a script supervisor or a producer's intervention. It came from the brutal, unscripted reality of death. When John Stamos' father passed away, the man he had once tried to fire was the first one at the funeral. Bob Saget didn't show up with a joke or a prepared bit. He showed up with a quiet, steady presence that John hadn't known he possessed. It was the first time the pretty boy saw the dirty comic as a human being. Then when Stamos spiraled into a dark battle with alcoholism and the public humiliation of a high-profile divorce, Saget became his unofficial sponsor. He would call Stamos every single day, sometimes multiple times, just to check if he was still breathing. The man Stamos once wanted to erase became the only person who refused to let him disappear. This is the profound lesson John Stamos is sharing at 62. Forgiveness is not a gift you give to someone else. It is the only way to stop your own heart from bleeding out. He realized that his hatred for Bob wasn't about Bob at all. It was about his own fear of not being enough. By letting go of the rivalry, he didn't just gain a friend. He gained a brother who understood his scars better than anyone else. The tragedy of Bob Saget's death in that Orlando hotel room is that it finally crystallized the value of the time they wasted being enemies. John's regret is palpable. He now understands that the most expensive thing in Hollywood isn't a mansion or a sports car. It's the years you lose to a grudge you can't even remember the reason for. We look at these icons in Uncle Jesse and Danny Tanner, and we think their lives are vastly different from our own. But the reality is, we all have a Bob Saget in our lives. We all have that one colleague, that one family member, or that one friend who rubs us the wrong way, whose cheesy jokes or annoying habits make us want to walk out of the room. We engage in our own petty backstage wars, keeping score of who got the last word or who stole the spotlight in a meeting. We wait for an apology that may never come, sitting, a silence that grows colder with every passing year. We act as if we have all the time in the world to reconcile, forgetting that hotel rooms in Orlando and sudden silences are waiting for all of us. John Stamos' story is a mirror. It asks us to look at our own full house, the crowded, messy relationships that define our daily existence, and identify the people we are currently trying to fire from our lives. Are you holding on to a hatred that serves no purpose? Are you letting an arrogant ego prevent you from seeing the brother standing right in front of you? Stamos is pleading with his audience to realize that the person you find too much today might be the only person who can keep you whole tomorrow. Have you ever hated someone so much you couldn't stand the sight of them, only to realize later they were the most important person you ever met? How did you bridge that gap? Or are you still waiting for the right time to say, "I'm sorry"? Let us know in the comments. We need to hear how you turned your own wars into peace, because as John learned, the clock is always ticking. At 62, John Stamos is no longer the cool uncle with the perfect hair and the effortless charm. He is a man who has been hollowed out by a loss he never saw coming. He teaches us that true friendship is not the absence of conflict. It is the courage to outlive it. It is the ability to look at someone you once despised and say, "I was wrong about you." The truth about Bob Saget isn't a scandalous headline or a dirty secret. It is the simple, devastating fact that love is a long-distance conversation that doesn't end at a funeral. John is still talking to Bob, still answering that final text message in his mind, still trying to make sense of a world without his witness. If Bob Saget were still alive, would John Stamos be this honest? Probably not. We often wait for the silence to finally start telling the truth. We wait for the ghost to appear before we admit how much the living person mattered. But John Stamos is choosing to use his platform to ensure that we don't make the same mistake. He is turning his grief into a manual for survival, showing us that even the most toxic, ego-driven rivalries can be salvaged if you're willing to put down your weapons. If you believe that real-life brotherhood is more important than a television script, and that even the deepest grudges deserve a second chance, then hit the like button and share this story. It is a reminder that we are all just full houses of conflicting emotions, trying to find a way to stay together until the lights go out. Don't wait for a tragedy to tell someone they are your person. Subscribe to the channel as we continue to unmask the real hearts behind the Hollywood gold. Tell us in the comments, what did the friendship of John and Bob teach you about your own life? Because the final revelation is simple. The hugs were fake in the beginning, but they were the only real thing at the end. We will see you in the next one.